Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eriecast.com/submit. And rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Well, hello and welcome to a little party we're having here at Dead and Roasted. Yep, the espressos are half off, so after inflation that's only $12 a shot. Help yourself. Oh, what are we celebrating? Well, my YouTube channel, Darkness Prevails, has broken through to 700,000 subscribers. It's been 8 years, a marriage, and 2 babies since I first started telling people how creepy the world is, and look at me now, running a coffee shop with the worst coffee imaginable for some of the most supernatural customers alive. No, this isn't a Starbucks. Well, now that doesn't mean I'm all out of stories. In fact, I've got a good friend here with me today by the name of Nature's Temper to help me share these true scary work stories with you about haunted radio stations, cemetery terrors, and more. These are Tales from the Break Room. By the way, if you like Nature's Temper, you can find him on YouTube under the same name. Evil entity living in the family store. From Assassins 2570. I was 19 at the time I got my first job at a store franchise in the US. I was new and eager to prove myself to the managers, so I took the night shifts. My location was open 24/7. After a few weeks, I was confident in my ability to handle the night shift alone. On the first night, I heard whispers coming from the women's clothing department. I glanced at the security cameras, and there was no one in the store. I shook it off. Later that night, I was eating my lunch, and I hear a loud slam, like a box was tossed off the 7-foot top shelves. I got up to investigate. I was 250 pounds, so on the bigger side, and I was rarely scared. I rounded a corner and saw a box of toilet paper on the floor. I looked up and I saw where it had fallen from. I sighed, cursing the day shift, as I put it back and went back to the front to continue to eat. I talked to my coworkers in the morning about the shoddy stacking job, and they said something that gave me cause for concern. They told me, "We stacked those boxes. If it was going to fall, it would have done so during second shift." I paused and replied, "Huh." Now, I'd been raised with the understanding that there were spirits, among other things, walking the earth. This came to mind for a split second, then I went on with my day. The next night was uneventful. I was relaxed for the third night. I came in, clocked in, and started serving customers. As the night progressed, I was stalking. At a certain point, I thought I caught my arm on the shelf, but when I looked down, I had 3 scratches on my forearm. I knew from that moment I was dealing with something angry. I called my manager, expressing the need for them to come in and see the scratches on my arm. They said to me, "It's 2 a.m. Are you sure you didn't just catch your arm on the shelves?" Knowing what I know about spirits, I told them, "I need you here. You know me." So they sighed and said they would be there in 5 minutes. I thanked them, and my battery died. I always carried my charger with me, and I kept my phone charged during work. So how it died, I have no idea. Suddenly, I heard this gut-wrenching scream from somewhere in the store. Instinctively, I ran to the front and looked at all the cameras. But there was no one anywhere in the store. I'm not religious. Even so, I said St. Michael's prayer and sat in that chair, waiting for my manager to show up. They eventually got there and saw me pale, as if my soul had left my body. Then the manager looked at my arm and saw the scratches. I was then told to go home for the night. I didn't argue. I just clocked out and left. I quit the place a few weeks later due to personal reasons. But before long, I found a news article about the girl that replaced me. The article read, she'd been found dead under a heavy box of tools from the shelf above. And I knew in that moment Something evil lives in that store. It wasn't paint. From Cy Mortem. This happened a few summers ago. The guy was even on the news, but none of us knew that, and none of us knew what he did until later. Personally, I wish I still didn't know. I work at a popular retail shop, and normally, as a closer, I'd start around 1 p.m. and work till 10 or 11 p.m. That day I had just come in to start my shift, working in the clothing section. I'd started zoning, which meant folding tables and sizing the clothing on the racks, in order from smallest to largest. Like any other day, I was in the children's departments, towards the back of the store, and away from the front doors. That's key information for later. My manager, as usual, had me help with a project. I was tasked with collecting the clearance socks we had left over from back stock boxes that had gone on clearance. I had to take them to the clearance aisle, which was located next to the paint counter and hardware, still towards the back of the store, but on the opposite end of the building from where I normally work. I had to empty the boxes neatly in a designated section of the aisle. It was a simple task, and considering I had 4 boxes full, the project would take me some time. As my manager stated before inserting the infamous line, "But knowing you, I don't expect it to take long." She then clocked out and I set off to the back room to collect the boxes. Again, I normally work in clothing, but as a store associate, customers will come up to you and ask questions, regardless of whether or not the associate they're talking to is familiar with that section. It's normal, typical behavior of a customer, so I wasn't surprised when I had a man who was just slightly taller than me, I'm 5'3", who had a stocky build, tan skin, and light brown dirty blonde hair approach me. He wore dark jeans that seemed dusty, and a white shirt with red splotches all over it. I immediately thought he was a painter or a roofer, something along those lines, and that it was paint he was covered in. He spoke calmly, asking me if I knew where the trash bags were located, and if by chance we sold single t-shirts, since, in his words, he was dirty after work. He said he had to go somewhere shortly. I, thinking nothing of this, directed him to the trash bags, not far from our electronics department, and suggested if he made his way through the middle of the store, he'd also find the men's clothing department. I told him to take a peek at the tables to see about finding what he needed. He thanked me and made his way while I went back to my project. Before long, I completed it, then went to the fitting room to collect my department returns. My coworkers were crowding the area in complete disbelief over something and chattering intently amongst themselves. That was normal until I heard the words 8 cop cars and guy in white shirt with red stains. Come to find out, the man I directed to the trash bags had gotten lost and asked another associate, saying he had a funeral to get ready for if the police didn't escort him first. It was like he was expecting it to happen. The man was then tackled by 4 officers and dragged hastily out of sight. None of us knew what happened, or why really, until we collectively showed up to work the next day. A few of the girls had watched the news. That man had been on the run for stabbing his wife 9 times and his 8-year-old son 5 times. He had come into our store as an alibi. It definitely wasn't for paint.
The Caretaker, from Kyle H. These events took place during the last summer before my first year of college. I was contacted by this family to help take care of this elderly couple. The couple, whom we shall call Tom and Betty, had a long history of medical issues and were getting up there in age. Tom was 88 and Betty was 82. Tom was diabetic and had Alzheimer's, and Betty had a long series of battles with cancer and wasn't entirely there mentally anymore. They also lived on a 20-acre farm that needed regular upkeeping. So I was hired to be the caretaker. My duties would include administration of medication, taking Tom and Betty to their doctor appointments, grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, and general groundskeeping of their farm. On top of all of this, I was always training for the upcoming cross-country and track and field season, as I was on a scholarship with my university, so I would often run to their home as they only lived 5 miles away from me. The first few days went flawlessly. They were easy to work with, and we were able to avoid any major hiccups. However, things started to change after a major storm rolled in. It started like all the other days, except they had a bit more energy than they usually did. I just wrote it off as strange behavior due to the storm that was approaching. You could feel the electricity in the air, and the air pressure shifted. I got there that morning at 6 a.m. by running like usual, and I found Tom out in the barn trying to start a tractor that hadn't worked for years. As I approached Tom, I could tell that he was visibly confused and angry that his tractor wasn't working. I hollered out to get his attention, and no response. So I reached for him, and as I was inches away from grabbing his arm, he snapped out of it and started screaming at the top of his lungs. The scream was weirdly high-pitched. It scared me so bad I nearly jolted out of my shoes. As I was trying to recompose myself, I replied, "Tom, don't you think it's time to go in for some breakfast?" He's silent. His face is expressionless, and he stares forward into nothingness. The best way I can describe the way he looked is by comparing it to the way a dead person looks, as if their soul has recently left their body. Just as I'm about to call out, he stands up and says, "Good morning, Kyle." Without saying another word, we walked back inside the house. That's when the fun really began. As we opened the door, the sky opened up and the rain started to pour. The rain hitting the metal roof was so relaxing that I nearly forgot about the strange interaction I just had with Tom. So I just stood there watching the rain for a few seconds to truly appreciate the welcomed relief. I then turned around, and what did I see? Betty standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing invisible dishes, fully naked. Without saying a word, I picked up her robe off the floor and wrapped it around her, guiding her to the table. I just ignored what I saw and started to cook their breakfast. I finished cooking, and neither of them was at the table. So I go looking for them. Both of them are in the back bedroom, violently yelling at each other. You don't know true anger until you experience it from people who are not cognitively aware or altogether. Their faces are blood red, spit flying everywhere. They're almost coming to blows because the roof in the bedroom was leaking. I jumped in between them, and in the most calming voice I could muster, I said, "Oh, I can fix that, no problem. You guys eat and I'll fix it real fast." That seemed to please them as they quietly went into the kitchen to eat. I rushed out to the barn to grab the ladder, a tarp, and some tools. The rain really starts to pick up now. Better work fast before there's any more damage. I lay the ladder up against the house and climbed up. I'm patching the hole. The rain is pouring, and then the next concerning event happens, and I didn't even notice. I get this burning feeling that someone is watching me. This weird, uneasy feeling rushes over me. I don't know if it was fight or flight, but my spider senses are tingling. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice a boot behind me. I slowly turn around and see Tom had made it up the roof and was standing behind me, just staring and watching me. Somehow he had grabbed the hammer that I brought up with me. Thinking fast, I said, "Thanks, Tom, I was looking for that," and took the hammer from his hand. I finished up, and we both made our way down the ladder without any more shenanigans. We make it inside just in time for the thunder and lightning to start. The sky becomes a frenzy with loud crashes and bright flashes of light. The storm is fully upon us at this point. Thankfully, Tom and Betty both started to settle down and fell asleep whilst watching TV. During this much-needed break, I started to clean up from breakfast and the hole in the roof. I'm starting to process what just transpired this morning, and how we've had a full day's worth of events, and it wasn't even lunchtime. I just chalked it up to whatever mental impairment they were dealing with, so I wasn't going to judge them. As the storm raged on, I realized I might not be able to run home later with this weather, So I quickly texted a friend asking if they'd be able to pick me up after their shift. Thankfully they agreed, but their shift didn't end until 6 p.m. Either way, I'm just happy I don't have to run 5 miles in a thunderstorm. I get back to cleaning and finish up other chores I have around the house. Nothing eventful happens for a few hours. I even ended up falling asleep watching the TV with them. Falling asleep was, still to this day, the biggest mistake I have ever made. I woke up a half hour later because of a series of thunders and lightning. Realizing that it was now 11:30 a.m., I look around and neither Tom nor Betty are to be found. I'm searching the main part of their house and I find nothing. I search the basement, attic and garage, all nothing. It dawns on me they're out in the barn. Dreading going out in the storm, I have to convince myself to open the door. The rain is pelting the roof and the thunder and lightning is crashing through the sky above. I put my cross-country skills to use and sprint out the door and down the long driveway to the barn. I find both Tom and Betty playing in the barn. It was like they mentally reverted back to their childhood form and were playing like two kids would. They're chasing each other around, just giggling with laughter. Understanding how mental decline and Alzheimer's can affect people, I briefly thought it was kind of cute, the way they were playing. But it turned creepy. I speak up. Looks like you guys are having fun. Ready for lunch? They stop dead in their tracks. The laughter stops, and they just give me a nasty side-eye. And this sent chills down my spine. It's silent between us. All we hear is the rain and thunder. They slowly turn to face me, and their faces turn to anger. I take a step back. In an instant and simultaneously, both Tom and Betty lunge at me. Thankfully, I'm able to react quickly enough to create a little distance between us. The giggling starts again, and they pause for a brief moment before they start to chase me. I'm not sure how to take this. I jumped into one of the horse stalls and climbed into the hayloft. But I wasn't safe. The chase continued for what felt like an eternity. The giggles never stopped. I'm trying to talk to them in a calm manner to get them to snap out of it. No response except for giggles. Nothing is working. It didn't matter what I said or did, their pursuit was relentless. I'm starting to panic. I can't just leave them here in this weird, unnatural mental state. I was hired to look after them. I pride myself in how I treat people, but this was beyond scary. For being two 80-something-year-olds, they were fast and there was no sign of them stopping. Thinking about how I could take care of them and how I need to keep them safe, I bolted out of the barn towards the house. At this point, the raging thunderstorm was the least of my concerns. I look back and I see them following me, still expressing that unnerving, angry face accompanied by their playful giggles. I get to the house first and think of a plan. I leave the main door open, and as I run by, I open the basement door. I quickly jump into a hiding place behind Tom's recliner. I hear them barge into the house, giggling. They're frantically searching for me. I'm trying my hardest to compose myself and not give myself away. They didn't pay much attention to the basement door. They're both running in and out of the living room like dogs do when they get the zoomies. They pass by the recliner dozens of times. Then, out of nowhere, Tom stops at the basement door, giggles, and slowly proceeds down the steps. I'm so laser-focused on watching Tom that I completely forget about Betty. Boom! Thunder and lightning explodes, allowing me to shift my focus. I slowly turn my head to look for Betty, and there she is, squatting down on the floor right next to me, and as soon as we make eye contact, she giggles. I jumped up, pushing the recliner out of the way, and headed for the door. I quickly pressed the lock on the door and slammed the door behind me as I bolted out of the house. Not caring about the storm, I give it everything I have and start running home, never looking back and not stopping until I reached the inside of my house. I contacted the family to tell them that I wouldn't be returning to provide care for Tom and Betty. They're quick to understand and told me that I was the first person to last more than a week. and that I was the 9th caretaker that year. Since starting college, I had never seen Tom or Betty again, nor did I ever return to that town. I know Mother Nature is a powerful force, and storms can cause shifts of energy in the atmosphere, but what I experienced that day felt unnatural.
Unexpected drive-through from Mr. J. I've listened to your podcasts for quite a while now, and so I guess I should start this off by saying that this won't be the kind of story that would normally be featured in one of your videos. The vast majority of the stories I hear have some crazy developments and twists and turns. Mine does not. It's simply something that scared the Jesus out of me while I was working, and nothing else. With that said, here goes. I've been working as a janitor for a factory that produces plastic bottles for over 2 years now. It's not the best job in the world, but it pays the bills, and it's not too hard. I usually work the night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. when the factory is closed, and there are no workers around. My job is to clean the floors, the machines, the bathrooms, and anything else that needs to be done. The factory is huge, with several buildings and warehouses connected by corridors and tunnels. It's easy to get lost if you don't know your way around. I've learned to memorize the layout of the place, and I always carry a flashlight with me. Sometimes I hear strange noises coming from the machines or the pipes, but I try not to pay attention to them. I just do my job and try to finish as soon as possible. One night, however, something unexpected happened. It was a cold and rainy night in October, and I was doing my usual routine. I started with the main building, where the offices and the cafeteria were located. Nothing unusual there, just some dust and trash to clean up. Then I moved on to the production building, where the machines that made the bottles were located. This was the largest and most noisy part of the factory, with rows and rows of machines that filled the air with heat and steam. I had to wear earplugs to protect my hearing from the constant whirring and clanking. I was cleaning one of the machines like usual when I heard a loud bang from somewhere behind me. It sounded like something heavy had fallen or exploded. It was so loud that I could hear it through my earplugs. I quickly turned around and saw smoke coming from one of the warehouses at the end of the hall. I wondered what had caused it and if anyone was hurt. I decided to check it out, hoping it was nothing serious. I walked towards the warehouse, following the smoke trail. As I got closer, I noticed that the door was slightly open, and there was a faint light coming from inside. I pushed the door open and entered the warehouse. The warehouse was filled with stacks of boxes and crates that contained finished bottles ready for shipment. The smoke was coming from one of the corners of the warehouse, where there was a large hole in the wall. I was flabbergasted. It looked like something had crashed through it from outside. There were pieces of metal and wood scattered around the hole, and some of them were still burning. I approached the hole cautiously, wondering what had caused it. As I got closer, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat. A car had crashed through the warehouse. It was a black sedan with tinted windows and a smashed front bumper. It looked like it crashed through the wall and landed on top of some boxes, crushing them under its weight. The car was still running, but there was no one inside. I stared at the car in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How did it get here? Who drove it? Where did they go? Why did they crash into the warehouse? I felt a surge of curiosity mixed with fear. I wanted to know more about this mysterious car, but I also felt like I was in danger. Something told me that this was not an accident, but something more sinister. I decided to call 911 and report what I had found. I took out my phone from my pocket and dialed the number. 911, what is your emergency? A voice answered. I spoke with concern. Hi, my name is X, and I work as a janitor at Y. There's been an accident here. Someone crashed their car into one of our warehouses. I answered back. Are you okay? Is anyone hurt? The voice asked. I'm okay, but I don't know about anyone else. There's no one in the car. Where are you exactly? I'm in warehouse number 7 at the end of Hall B. Okay, stay calm and stay where you are. We're sending help right away. I hung up and waited for help to arrive. I hoped they would come soon. As I waited, I looked around the warehouse again. There was something odd about this whole situation. Why would someone drive their car into a factory at night? What were they trying to do? Even though I knew it was stupid, I felt a sudden urge to investigate further. Maybe there were some clues inside the car that could explain what happened. I walked towards the car slowly, careful not to step on any burning debris or broken glass. The car looked expensive and sleek, like something a rich person would drive. The windows were tinted so dark that I couldn't see anything inside. I wondered who owned it and what they were doing here. I reached the car and tried to open the door. It was locked. I tried the other doors, but they were also locked. I was about to give up and go back to the hole when I noticed something on the dashboard. There was a small device that looked like a GPS or a tablet. It was attached to the dashboard by a wire, and it had a screen that was lit up. I leaned closer to the window and tried to see what was on the screen. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a map of some kind. There were dots and lines and symbols on it, and some of them were blinking or moving. I had no clue what it was, but I realized that this was not a normal GPS or tablet. It was something else, and whatever it was, it seemed dangerous. After I saw that, I quickly moved away from the car and waited for the police to arrive. They showed up about 15 minutes later, their sirens piercing through the silence of the factory, announcing their arrival. 2 police cars screeched to a halt in front of the damaged warehouse. Officers in uniform jumped out of their vehicles, and I quickly identified myself as the janitor who had called in the accident. One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, took charge. She instructed her partner to secure the perimeter while she approached me. After a brief exchange of information, she asked me to recount what had happened. I explained how I had heard the loud crash and discovered the car in the warehouse, still running, but with no driver in sight. She thanked me for my cooperation and asked me to remain nearby while they conducted their investigation. She also asked if I can call the guys that were in charge of the security cameras. Other officers began to examine the scene, taking photos, collecting evidence, and trying to make sense of the bizarre situation. I didn't know what was going on, but from what I could see, the officers were frequently consulting with one another and making phone calls. After they made their phone calls, the officer came to me and asked if I have any additional information that I may be left out because I deemed it unimportant. I said no. About 10 minutes later, more cars came, and some men quickly rushed to the scene. After they arrived, they demanded that we all leave the premises. I learned why from one of the officers a week later. To my horror, it turns out, the GPS thing that I saw in the car was actually a DIY bomb. Thankfully, it didn't detonate, because if it did, I wouldn't be here writing this story. I don't know anything else about the case, about who drove the car into the building and why, but I'm just glad I'm still here.
The Voice. An EMS horror story from Frank C. I am a medical field professional, and I have been for quite some time now. I've bounced from nursing homes to hospitals to where I am now, EMS. Death is a fairly frequent occurrence when you're in my line of work, and each death is one more you remember no matter how many you see or hear about. However, there are a few things that have stuck with me, and this story I'm about to share is one of them. This is when the other side reached out, and I unknowingly reached back. This is when I heard the voice. Let me start by saying all names from here on out will be changed for privacy, but the location will be similar, but not near to where I work for the story's sake. First off, a bit of background for me. I'm in my 30s and I have been in the medical field since I was fresh out of high school. I started as a CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant, but I moved out of that field in favor of emergency medicine, and I got nationally certified as an EMT during the winter of 2021. I made the switch because I had some strange experiences as a CNA that were off-putting, to say the least. And EMS just really interested me. I grew up around law enforcement and military, so the lifestyle seemed fitting for me, almost like it was in my blood. EMT school was fascinating, and in my area, it isn't hard to find work in the field. Thanks, COVID. Needless to say, finding a job was easy, and I started running on an ambulance right after I graduated in a nearby city about an hour west of my hometown. There are two types of ambulances used in our area. The first is a BLS unit, Basic Life Support, and then there's an ALS unit, Advanced Life Support. I was on the BSL unit, which is just meant to be run by 2 EMTs, with no paramedic to respond to basic calls. That way resources are used efficiently. I ended up choosing the night shift to work on. There was a good shift differential, and the calls were a lot more interesting to deal with. Me and my partner, whom I will call Hank, worked the east side of town, which was known for being a little more violent at times due to large use of drugs and lots of homeless in that area. We both lived in the Pacific Northwest, and if you've ever visited or lived there, then you'll be familiar with how the winters can be. Harsh and unforgiving. I remember this winter night like it was yesterday. The shift started normally. I woke up and dragged myself out of bed. Trying to sleep during the day is something you do not get used to, even when you work nights for a long time. I stuffed some breakfast down and got dressed for the day as my car warmed up. When I walked outside to get into my car, I remember the cold biting at my face until I sat down inside the car and shut the door. It's going to be one of those days, isn't it? I asked myself as I pulled out of the driveway, shivering. I pulled into the parking lot of the station and took note of the dreary and cold grasp the weather held over the whole city. It always reminded me of something spooky, like the Grim Reaper was waiting in the dark clouds to see who he would collect next with his skeletal hands. I parked my car in the only open space available. With my luck, it was a bit of a walk. My car door cracked open with bits of ice flaking off as I pushed it. My breath now materialized in front of me as I scurried to the front entrance. I always came to work about 30 minutes early to get my mind in the right space and to start a pot of coffee. I watched the machine sputter to life as it slowly filled the pot with what would be fueling my morning. I think the smell of the coffee must have called Hank into the room because not a minute later, I saw him turn the corner into the break room with the same dull look everyone who worked the night shift had. "Hey man, you better be making me enough for a few cups," Hank said with a bland voice. "Come on, man," I said in a joking tone. "I heard that you had thought I'd forget about you." Me and Hank always had a joking manner with each other. When you deal with the stuff we deal with, then you almost have to if you want to stay sane. "Did you get the rig all cleaned out and refilled?" I asked. "Yeah, she's all ready to go," Hank said as he took a sip from his mug. It was around 11 p.m. when we hit the roads and got to our assigned area on the east side of the city. We parked at the station and started to catch up with each other. We had a few calls here and there, but nothing that was too out of the ordinary for that night. That was until around 3 a.m., when our radio went off with a single code word. Now, in our area we use different codes than normal for EMS. However, whenever dispatch calls us, they give us the usual description and information of the call along with any bystander or caller information. Our radio crackled and we heard a voice say, 1032. Me and Hank just looked at each other. Neither of us recognized the voice we heard. "Did we get a new dispatcher?" I asked Hank in a confused tone. "In a call like that, there would have to be," Hank said with a hint of annoyance in his voice. A 1032 is a code for drowning where we are, and it wasn't too uncommon to get calls for them on the east side. And there's a pretty big lake, and the homeless like to camp near the bridge outcrop right next to the lake. If you fell into the water around this time of year, it was basically a death sentence due to the cold weather. Me and Hank waited for a while to see if anyone would respond, but no one did. After waiting with no response, we called in. "This is Bus 4 and we're inbound to the lake. Requesting rendezvous with ALS near the shoreline parking lot." We flipped our sirens on and headed eastbound towards the lake. We drove in silence and prepared for the possibility of a lifeless body floating in the lake, frozen and forgotten. We rolled in around 10 minutes later, and the scene was eerily quiet. As we stepped out of the rig, the cold stole every bit of warmth we had built up on our ride over. We had not heard from dispatch about any updates, and our ALS unit was still another 15 minutes out. We decided to search the area to see if anyone required immediate help. The shoreline is a long strip of sand and a beach, so we decided to split up and stay within sight of each other just in case something went south. About 2 minutes into the search, I could see Hank's flashlight behind me scanning the shallow waters of the coast, while I was scanning the shore in front of me. Besides the obvious sign of old homeless camps, I wasn't really seeing anything. I reached for my radio and called Hank. "Hey man, I'm not seeing much of anything over here. I think dispatch must have screwed this one up," I said whilst walking. I let go of the call button and waited for a response, but I heard nothing. "Hey there, Hank, you copy?" I asked again after a moment of silence. Still no response. I turned around to look at my partner, and he was still searching down the bank, but he was now out of sight except for the beam that shone from his light. "Real state-of-the-art equipment we have here," I said to myself sarcastically. This wasn't the first time I had a radio malfunction on me in winter. However, I think this time there was another kind of interference in my radio other than the cold, wet air. I hated not being within shouting distance of Hank just in case of an emergency, so I started to head his way, thinking we would meet eventually somewhere along the shore. As I started to head back, my flashlight started to dim. Great, just what I need. Now I get a wonderful chance to eat shit whilst I'm walking back, I thought to myself, now more annoyed than anything. I started slowly walking back, careful not to trip on the rocks. I made my way closer to the shore, that way I could avoid the bigger rocks and stick near the sand. I had to strain my eyes to see right in front of me, and it was taking all of my focus. I nearly jumped out of my skin when my radio crackled to life with a loud, unfamiliar voice.
"Please! It's so cold!"
It shouted. At first I thought it was Hank, but then I realized it was not his voice at all. I froze in my tracks and slowly grabbed my radio and raised it to my face. Since I did not recognize the voice, I said, "Caller, please repeat your message and identify yourself." I waited, and there was nothing. Just cold, wet air that suddenly felt heavy. I swear to you, I could feel something gazing through the back of my skull into my eyes. Whatever it was, it clearly wanted me to know it was there, even though I couldn't see it. Just as I was about to take my next step, my radio crackled to life again.
"You can't leave. I need your help."
This time, when it spoke, the voice was quieter and more somber. Now I was full-on paranoid. I wanted to just start running and sit in my rig until Hank came back. I started nervously looking around, half expecting to see someone on all fours running at me in the dark. The air felt suffocating, and the dark seemed to be enclosing around me like it was trying to snuff out any light that dared to disturb it. That's when something in the water caught my eye. Something that clearly did not belong in the lake. As my focus sharpened on the object, my heart started to beat out of my chest and my breathing slowed. It was a human. Cold, dead, and floating with the broken shambles of ice. As I scanned the body, I looked at its face. His eyes were still open. As I matched the body's gaze, my radio shot to life again and whispered,
"I see you."
I bike-pedaled, nearly falling over, and started to shout for Hank. He quickly made his way over to me, asking what was wrong. All I could do was call for him, struggling to form any sensible sentences. When he got to me, he noticed how visibly distressed I was. He looked over to where I was pointing and said, "Well, clearly someone got the 1032 right." He looked back at me, probably expecting a response. When I said nothing, he said, "It's just another body, dude. I've done these calls all the time." I looked over at him and I said, "Yeah, I know. I just think I'm getting overworked again. I'm going to radio the ALS and PD and let them know what we found." I didn't wait for his response as I took off towards the rig. I was way too eager to get away from the body and its glaring eyes. As I made my radio calls back at the rig, I did it on autopilot like I was in a haze. The whole time I was thinking about the body looking at me, and my radio whispering, "I see you," as soon as I met its eyes. To this day, I believe that body was speaking to us through our radio so it would not be lost or forgotten. I still work EMS to this day, but I have a newfound respect for the dead that I deal with. I have yet to have another experience as vivid as this one, and I do not want to have another. I still keep it light whilst I'm on duty, but I always make sure that they know I'm there for them. The last thing I want to hear is another voice crackling over my radio while I'm working late one night. The last thing I need to hear is another voice beckoning me towards another disturbing scene. I think I've had my fill of eeriness for the foreseeable future.
Radio Station Nightmare from Amy D. Back in the early 90s, I worked at a local radio station as a secretary. However, from time to time, I would help out by recording commercials, the weather, and on occasion, I would help run the soundboard on Saturday nights if our part-timer had to call off or was on vacation. This story is about what I experienced on one of those nights. The station was located on the edge of town on a large plot of land, surrounded by woods. The building was small, with 7 rooms, a bathroom, and a small parking lot. I arrived shortly before my start time of 10 p.m., so I could check in with the DJ before he left. The equipment was older and often experienced technical issues or glitches. The DJ, we'll call him Randy, told me everything had been working fine that evening. No technical problems or issues. He gave me a few pointers on what to do if something should occur. I had some issues last time, and let's just say there were more than a few complaints about the same song being played over and over. After enduring some ribbing about the incident from Randy, he took off and I locked up behind him. I liked working this shift. Very little due. It's good money, and I could easily have my boyfriend, now husband, come sit with me while I worked. He arrived shortly after I started, and I noticed he was holding something big in his hand. "What's that?" I asked. "This beauty?" he began. "It's a real Japanese sword." He slowly pulled it out of the case. The handle was long and a beautiful deep blue color. The blade was slightly curved, and above the handle was an amazing, intricate design of a dragon. While walking back to the studio, he told me the story of how his grandfather gave it to him before he passed away. While he was telling the story, a loud bang came from the front door. We both panicked. He wasn't supposed to be there after all, so I told him to hide while I headed towards the main entrance. The outside light wasn't on, so I flipped the switch, but nothing. No one was out there. The door was one of those wide, all-glass doors, so it was easy to see out of. I walked a little closer to get a better view, but still saw nothing. I told my boyfriend, we'll call him David, that it was all right to come out. Most likely just kids goofing around. About 10 minutes passed when we heard a noise from outside, followed by loud banging again. "Dang it," I mumbled, irritated, as I headed back to the door. David chose to hide again, just in case. The first thing I noticed was the light I had just turned on was now off. I tried flipping the switch a few times to no avail. Approaching the door, I noticed shards of glass scattered across the concrete patio. The bulb was broken. I looked out, but it was too dark to see past the dim glow of the fluorescent light behind me. I unlocked the door and grabbed the handle firmly, opening it only a crack. "Cops are on the way!" I yelled out as loud as I could, and quickly shut and locked the door. I, of course, wasn't planning on calling the cops, but I did hope whoever was messing with us didn't know that. We returned to the studio, and I had some real work to do, so David stepped into the hallway. I could easily see him through the large studio window as he began showing off, twirling that sword and jabbing at the air. Suddenly, it sounded like a stampede of horses was running across our roof. I jumped to my feet and locked eyes with David. I was certain the roof was going to collapse. I ran into the hall. "Is it storming out there?" I asked, knowing full well it wasn't, but I needed to make sense of all of this. He shook his head while looking up. "I've never heard a storm like that before," he said. Even though it only lasted maybe 10 seconds, my ears were ringing terribly. I got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach that this wasn't just kids messing around. David clutched his sword with both hands and made some comment about nothing hurting us as long as he had that, which was immediately followed by the lights going out. The radio station had a backup generator that would keep the on-air light and soundboard on, which created an eerie red glow. We walked over to the window to see if the houses behind the woods still had power. And they did. That bad feeling I had was a lot worse now. I grabbed a flashlight and a phone book from the desk. I decided to call the electric company to find out what was going on. I dialed the number and nothing. I could hear a dial tone, I could hear the numbers beeping when pressed, but it wouldn't call out. It just stayed a dial tone. Every phone we tried did the same thing until we got to the back desk in the front office. When I picked up, right away I heard people talking, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. I even let David listen in, and he couldn't understand it either. There used to be a thing called party lines, for those of us older folks that might remember them. But this was a professional office, so that wasn't the case. I just needed a rational explanation. I tried to put my fear aside, making sure everything was still running all right with the soundboard, so we began walking back to the studio. As we walked, we heard what sounded like someone violently pulling at the front door, trying desperately to open it. The front office is right beside the main entrance door. David was angry at this point. He said he had had enough. He quickly bolted to the front door, sword held in front of him, but as soon as he got there, the noises stopped. I saw him look outside. Then he just shook his head and said, "No one's out there." I started thinking maybe David set this whole thing up. Maybe he had some of his friends out there messing with me so he could play hero. I know it was terrible of me to think that, but again, I was really starting to freak out, and I needed an answer. If I asked if he was doing any of this, he assured me he wasn't. He'd been there with me before, so why now? It just didn't make any sense, so I believed him. We made it back to the studio, and as I was checking on the soundboard, the light in the small kitchenette began to flicker. Then the lights in the hall, the back room, the front office, they all started flashing on and off. David sarcastically said, "You think I'm pulling that off too?" As I stood there looking at him, trying to figure out if I was going to laugh or cry, the phone rang. "Thank God," I yelled out and quickly answered. However, my joy was short-lived. I heard multiple voices on the line, whispering over each other, along with this creepy teeth-chattering sound that I'll never forget. I was so done. I went out the back door into the parking lot with David and sent a page to Randy, since I couldn't call him. I asked him to come back and help me figure out what was going on. David waited outside with me until I figured Randy would be close. Then he left. Not a second after he left, I noticed the lights had stopped flickering and were all back on again. Randy arrived, and we went inside. I told him what had happened, minus my boyfriend being there, of course. He said there had been no outages that he knew of in the area, and everything was working fine now, even the phones. He cleaned up the broken glass and told me to lay off the juice. I only worked there for about 6 more months and never worked the night shift again. Fast forward 10 years later, David and I are at a neighborhood barbecue when a discussion started about our hometown being one of the locations of a Japanese prisoner of war camp. We were interested in finding out more, so we began to research it. Come to find out, the location of the camp was the current location of the radio station. Now it's all starting to make sense.
I wish we could count on Congressman Scott Perry.
He voted to
Lot G26 from Just Another Creep. I hold a unique position that often goes unnoticed. I'm a live-on-site cemetery caretaker. My responsibilities encompass tending to the landscaping, assisting with grave digging and preparations, and, most importantly, ensuring the peace of the departed and their resting places. I take great pride in maintaining their lots, keeping them free of weeds and preserving the pristine condition of the headstones. For me, it's not just a job. It's a profound calling. This tradition runs deep in my family. My father, his father, and generations before us were all caretakers for graveyards. I've essentially inherited the responsibility for the dead. Graveyards to me embody a tranquil space for remembrance. Basically, they're a mosaic of past lives, a tribute to those laid to rest. Every visitor carries a unique set of memories to unravel, lives to recollect, and loved ones to honor in their shared history. It's a sanctuary to pay respects through the act of remembering. On the flip side, graveyards devoid of visitors and caretakers cease to be spaces of remembrance. Instead, they transform into a vault for things one wishes to bury in the depths of the earth. Unattended cemeteries, lacking respect, succumb to corruption, morphing into locations designed to shroud and abandon the memories within. You must know it is very important to maintain a cemetery as a haven of peace and reverence. The departed find solace less readily when overlooked and dishonored, paving the way for peculiar occurrences to unfold. The story I'm about to share with you is an example of what can happen when the dead are forgotten or discarded. This happened a few years back. As I strolled through the cemetery that day, tending to my routine, a peculiar sight caught my attention. Nestled in the far corner of the last section, distant but apparent, stood an unfamiliar tombstone. From a distance, its decrepit state revealed decades of wear, staining it black, while unruly weeds and brambles ensnared the neglected monument. Yet what struck me the most was the disconcerting truth that the headstone did not belong here. In my intimate knowledge of this cemetery, my cherished garden, and myself as its caretaker, I could sense a disturbance. The misplaced marker disrupted the harmony of the lot it now occupied. Compelled to unravel this mystery, I approached the weathered headstone, hoping for an error in my perception. Upon reaching the forlorn grave, my fears were realized. The stone was much older than initially thought. It leaned with a tired tilt and bore the weight of time. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and the only semblance of cohesion came from the tenacious grip of weeds and vines, reluctant witnesses to the tombstone's slow surrender to the elements. The strange stone disrupted my peace and familiarity with the ground I was on. Stunned, I found myself locked in place, muttering to myself, trying to understand what I was looking at. Weird, I thought. This is Section G, Lot 26. A vacant lot. I'm sure of it. I took a quick glance at my surroundings. Perplexed, I spoke aloud. What the heck is this? The idea of it being a prank did cross my mind, but it didn't really make sense. Placing an old headstone like this is a lot of work, but having rampant weeds build up on it, it would take a long time, so that just isn't possible. Plus, there were no signs of a disturbance anywhere else around it. It was more like the headstone had just materialized overnight. Freaked out, I stood there, caught between staring and thinking, grappling with this weird scene. Soon I felt helpless. I bent down to take a closer look at the stone, hoping what was written on it would at least reveal something. As I cleared away some of the weeds and briars, I realized the stone was eerily bare. No name, no date, no etchings. An unmarked grave, I mumbled. Nothing about this made any sense. I decided to return to the caretaker's dwelling, which was on the property. I fervently searched my desk back there until I unearthed the cemetery schematic, a comprehensive record of sections, lots, and occupancy. With a sense of foreboding, I traced the coordinates to lot G26 with a finger. A chilling, confusing revelation awaited. G26, though it had been purchased, remained currently vacant. I fell back into my desk chair. What is even happening right now, I thought. I then decided to call my dad, telling him about the odd situation I was in. Son, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't heard stranger ramblings in my ears around cemeteries. Sometimes the dead can be as complicated as the living. I asked him what he meant. I could tell his tone hardened. It means do what you know. You're a caretaker like me and my dad before me. Attend to the resting places of the dead. Start there and see where it goes. We said our goodbyes and I hung up, still baffled by the unexplained tombstone. Even though that didn't help as much as I thought it would, the call left me feeling a little relieved. Nonetheless, I decided to keep my distance from that haunting grave, choosing to ignore it entirely. I went about my daily routine, deliberately avoiding that section, particularly G26. After finishing my chores, I returned home, had dinner, and went to bed. While usually indifferent to my dreams, that night I had a very vivid and horrifying experience. In this dream, I walked through the cemetery at night, the peace disrupted by a soft voice that grew increasingly loud. Despite its incomprehensibility, I sensed it calling to me. Suddenly, I lost control of my body and felt compelled to walk towards lot G26. Desperate to resist it, I screamed for help, but no help came. I approached the grave. I could see the weeds and vines writhing around it like serpents. I stopped only upon reaching the thing. And then the vines began to ensnare my feet and ankles, lashing the sides of my legs. The mysterious voice persisted, its words still nonsense to me. Standing before the tombstone, the ground began to shift and open, unveiling an open grave with a dim blue light emanating from it. Despite my efforts, an otherworldly force held me captive. I wanted to run, but this odd power held me there. The coffin lid creaked open, the blue light intensifying. Soon from that blue glow, a skeletal hand seized my throat. There was then an ungodly scream that ravaged my senses. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, the echoes of the nightmare still haunting my surroundings. As I slowly realized I was awake and looked around the room, I saw sunbeams tiptoeing through the window. Then there was a knock at the door. My heart sank for a moment, and I thought about pinching myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I got up lazily and went to the door. I reached for the knob, still a little bit unsettled from my nightmare. As I opened the door, my heart sank. There, only a few feet from me, was that unmarked grave. At that point, I felt overwhelmed. I screamed at the tombstone, my voice cutting through the eerie silence. "Leave me alone! What do you want from me?" I trembled, a mixture of fear and anger rising up. But if I was going crazy, then crazy was what it was going to get. Inhaling deeply, I grabbed my tools. I began to trim at the unruly weeds around the stone, cutting off the briars, scrubbing away decades of grime. I then carefully corrected its posture, straightening it. I even prepared a vase of fresh flowers. I closed my eyes hard then, standing in silent communion with this tombstone. And as I opened my eyes, I was astonished and relieved. The headstone, once neglected and haunted, had now vanished. That wandering headstone continues to reappear sporadically. Each time I find it, I dedicate a moment to clean its weathered surface and adorn it with fresh flowers. Something about lilies feels like its preferred choice. The randomness of its appearances remains a mystery to me, yet there's an unspoken understanding between me and this displaced marker. This story has really solidified to me that cemeteries are more than just resting places. They are common ground between the past and the present, where the departed remind and the living remember. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.
What's step 23?
For steps 23 through 50, please upgrade your subscription.
With the new Assemble and Bake by Blue Apron, you can whip up a crowd pleaser in no time. Pre-chopped ingredients, minimal cleanup. Just assemble, bake, and enjoy. Get $50 off your first 2 orders with code 50OFF.
I'm not reckless. I'm the guy who brings extra headlamps. That's the part that still irritates me when I think about it. If you looked at what I packed that day, you'd assume I was the careful one. 2 headlamps with fresh batteries, a backup flashlight, printed topo maps in a folder even though I had the route saved on my phone. First aid kit, extra water, spare socks. I did all the right things, except the one that mattered. This was 2017, Mojave Desert, California. Late spring, already hot by mid-morning. I'm not a professional explorer, just a geology hobbyist who spent years reading, hiking, and explaining rocks to people who didn't ask. I like knowing where I am and why it looks the way it does. My friend Wes was the same type, just louder about it. He'd sent me photos of a cave entrance he found online. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal. A known opening people posted about. Our plan was just drive out early, hike in, look around, get back out before the heat got serious. We parked off a dirt road, no other cars, which didn't feel strange. That's the desert. The cave entrance looked exactly like the photos. Just a dark cut in pale rock. No warning signs, no drama. The temperature drop hit as soon as we stepped inside. Outside was oven hot. Inside felt cool. It smelled like dust and minerals. We turned on our headlamps and did what we always do. Pointed out formations, took photos, talked like this was another normal trip. We marked our route with small stone piles. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch the light on the way back. At first, everything matched the story we expected. Then we rounded a bend and saw something that didn't belong. It looked like a rock until Wes stopped and said, "That's cardboard." Flattened, pushed against the wall, still printed. Next to it was a plastic water jug and a candle burned down short, with soot on the stone above it. That wasn't geology gear. Wes laughed, the forced kind. "Guess someone's been hanging out." I said, "Probably hikers, but we were deep enough that you didn't wander in by accident. You had to choose this." We kept going, slower now. Voices sounded too loud in the cave, like they didn't belong to us anymore. Then we found what looked like a sleeping spot. Packed dirt in an oval. A shallow dent shaped like someone had been lying there. Not a quick rest. Something longer. Wes crouched and said, "There aren't any footprints." That's what got me. The floor held prints. We could see our own tracks clearly. But there weren't fresh tracks leading deeper or back out the way we came. I started doing mental math. Side passages, other exits, things we hadn't researched. That gap suddenly felt big. We should have turned around right there. We didn't. We kept moving because neither of us wanted to be the one to overreact. Not long after, I noticed the marks on the wall. A long scrape at about shoulder height dragged through dust and soft stone. Too consistent to be natural. "That's not old," Wes said. That was it. I said, "We're heading back." He didn't argue. On the way out, the sound changed. A soft shuffle behind us. Far enough to question, close enough to notice. Timed wrong, like it responded to us moving. We stopped. Then we heard voices. At least 2. Human. Muffled. Echoing in a way that made distance hard to judge. Short phrases. Pauses. Like people navigating. Not joking. Not laughing. Wes whispered, "Is that?" I didn't answer. I did something stupid. Instinct, I guess. I killed my headlamp for a second. The darkness didn't feel empty. I turned it back on immediately and hated myself for learning that. We moved faster. Behind us, a rock skittered. Neither of us kicked it. The voices stayed behind us, like they didn't need to hurry. When daylight finally showed ahead, it should have felt like relief. Instead, something cut across it. A shape at the mouth of the cave, blocking the glow for a second. Then gone. Wes made this quick, startled sound and almost lost his footing. I could tell he saw it too. We came out hard into the sun. Wind sounded too loud. Everything felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. We walked fast back to the car. The passenger door wasn't fully shut, not latched. We stood there for a second before touching anything. Then I checked inside. Nothing missing. But there was a smear of dust on the passenger window at hand height, like someone leaned in to look. We left fast enough to spin the tires in the dirt. Later, I reported it. Ranger station, non-emergency line. Everyone was polite. Notes were taken. Just that. I understand why. It's the desert. People hide out, people wander. Not every story turns into a search. The cave didn't scare me. What scared me was realizing it never felt empty. Like we were the ones trespassing.
In a world where January is supposed to be boring, one staple of the holidays refuses to end.
This happened in 2017, Ozark National Forest in Arkansas. I was 21, a college freshman, and this was one of those cheap weekend trips where you convince yourself you're outdoorsy because you bought gear once. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Chris, and Evan. Nothing extreme planned, just camping, a fire, some drinks, and pretending we weren't thinking about classes for a couple days. We picked a campsite that looked safe on paper. Fire ring, flat ground, trees spaced far enough apart that it didn't feel closed in. The road wasn't far, but once you stepped into the tree line, it felt isolated in that quiet, swallowing way forests have at night. We set up while there was still light. Everything felt normal. Laughing too loud, messing with the tent poles, Tyler trying to split wood like he knew what he was doing, Evan taking photos for social media. The usual. Once it got dark, the fire became the center of everything. Phones were dying, but there wasn't service anyway. Night sounds were normal. Crickets, wind, something moving through brush, nothing that stood out. We were mid-conversation when the whistling started. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't someone trying to sound like a bird. It was clean and steady, like a person casually whistling to themselves. Almost cheerful. It came from beyond the firelight, just past where the trees thickened and the darkness took over. Everyone stopped talking at once. Chris called out, "Hello?" The whistling stopped instantly. We sat there listening. "Dude, it's just some guy messing with us." That's what Tyler said. He meant it to calm everyone down. Like, okay, worst case, it's a bored guy in the woods who wants attention. He wasn't wrong, and that's what made it worse. Because if it was just some guy, then it meant there was someone out there close enough to watch us, confident enough to play with us, and comfortable enough to stay hidden. We tried to pick the conversation back up, but it didn't work. 10 seconds later, the whistling started again. Chris called out louder this time. "Hey!" Again, instant silence. Tyler grabbed a flashlight and pointed it into the trees. The beam hit trunks, branches, floating bugs. Nothing else. The whistling stayed off. He lowered the light. Whistling resumed. He raised it again. Silence. It was so precise it felt unreal, like we were controlling a switch without meaning to. Evan said quietly, "That's not funny." Tyler swept the light side to side. The beam died after a certain distance, like the darkness had a hard edge. As soon as he lowered it, the whistling came back. Slightly repositioned. Not closer exactly, but more targeted, if that makes any sense. Chris said, "He's watching the light." That sentence changed everything, because someone messing with us is annoying. Someone studying how we react is different. We got louder, like volume could build a wall. Tyler kept joking, but even he kept looking toward the trees. The whistling cut in and out depending on where the light was pointed, like it was testing us. Then it moved. Suddenly it was coming from farther to the right, like whoever it was had moved while we were focused elsewhere. Evan asked, "How did he move that fast?" Chris said the thing nobody wanted to hear. There might be more than one. That made everything click. The way the sound seemed to relocate without footsteps, the way it always stayed just outside the beam. One whistles, the other moves. Or neither whistles, and the sound is just bait. We started packing without saying we were leaving. Just doing it. Quietly. The whistling continued in short bursts. Sometimes it didn't start right away and we'd think it was over. Then it came back like a reminder. At one point, the fire popped and dipped for a second, just enough that the circle of light shrank. In that moment, I saw something between two trees, just a vertical shape that didn't match the spacing, like someone had been standing there and leaned back behind a trunk. Tyler's light swung over immediately. Nothing. Just trees. I didn't want to say anything, but Chris looked at me and said, "You saw that too?" I nodded. That was enough. We backed toward the car together. The tents were right there, but none of us wanted thin fabric between us and whatever was out there. A tent suddenly felt useless. As soon as we moved away from the fire, the whistling stopped completely. That silence felt worse. We were halfway to the car when a branch snapped nearby, like really close. Chris spun around with his light and yelled, "Stop!" Nothing answered. We got into the car fast, locked the doors, and Tyler started the engine. We sat there with the headlights blasting into the trees, waiting for something to show itself. Nothing happened. We didn't sleep in the tents. We slept in the car, doors locked, pretending we were just being cautious. But nobody actually slept. Every sound felt too close. Morning came like a reset. In daylight, we walked back to the fire ring expecting to feel stupid. Instead, we saw footprints. Not ours. Different tread, heavier heel. Just a few near the edge of the ring, like someone had stepped close enough to look in. There was also a crushed beer can near one of the rocks. We didn't bring beer. Tyler stared at it and said, "So he was close." We packed up and left without talking much. I've thought about that night a lot since then. The whistling wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was realizing it stopped when it got what it wanted. Back in 2016, I was working days at a warehouse outside town. Long shifts, same routine, nothing special. When the workday ended, the hours stretched out in that way they only do in small towns. Too much time, nowhere to put it. So on weekends, me and a couple friends would drive around until we landed somewhere quiet. That old baseball field was perfect. It had been abandoned for years, but it wasn't fenced off properly. The dugouts were tagged with old graffiti. The bleachers were half broken. The fence had gaps where kids had been cutting through forever. You could park near home plate, shut the headlights off, and it felt like the world ended right there. Beyond the outfield fence, the tree line was thick. Real thick. Your headlights didn't reach it. They just stopped. That night, it was me, Kyle, and Aaron. Nothing planned. Just driving, talking trash, windows down, air cooling off. We parked like always. Music low, warm soda. Sitting on the bleachers, feet on dusty concrete, talking about work and nothing. Then the conversation died for a second. Not awkward, just quiet. And then we heard a single metal sound, like someone hit the fence once and stopped. Kyle laughed and said, "Probably a deer." Aaron joked about how Indiana deer were built wrong. I didn't laugh. I noticed the timing. The sound came exactly when we went quiet, like it was waiting for that moment. I said, "Yeah, probably." We kept talking, but it didn't settle back in. The noise stayed louder than our voices. Every pause felt stretched. A few minutes passed. Nothing else happened. Then Aaron dared me to walk out to the outfield fence. Kyle pointed, "You're the biggest. Go." I rolled my eyes, but I stood up anyway. That's how it works when you don't want to be the guy who backed down. Walking across the field, the dugout graffiti looked pale under the moon, like old scars. I made it halfway and stopped, because I saw something. It wasn't a full figure stepping out, just a shape, a shoulder, maybe part of a head, tucked behind a tree at the very edge of the woods. It was positioned like it had been there already, waiting for someone to walk far enough away from the others. I stopped there, trying to understand what was going on. The shape didn't move forward. It stepped back. One careful movement, no noise, no crash through leaves. Just gone, like it knew exactly how to disappear. I didn't shout. I didn't want that. I turned around and walked back fast enough to close the distance, slow enough to pretend nothing was wrong. Kyle asked if I touched the fence. I said yes, and went straight to the car. Aaron laughed and called me out for lying. I didn't answer. I just turned my phone flashlight toward the outfield. They followed. 3 weak beams waving across the grass. The light didn't reach the tree line. That's when we heard crunching the leaves. Then a sound that didn't belong at all. A short whistle. Aaron said quietly, "Okay." "Nope." Kyle laughed too loud and said, "Let's go." We piled into the car fast, doors slamming, all of us talking at once like noise could keep the field from listening. I turned the key. Dash lights on. Radio clicked. But the car didn't start. I tried again. Same thing. Everyone went quiet. That's when I looked up. Near the dugout opening, where no one should have been, someone was standing at the edge of the infield dirt. Just standing there facing us. Like, "You see me now." I tried the key again, and the engine finally caught. I didn't ease out. I threw it in reverse, gravel spraying, headlights swinging across the field. The moment the lights hit the dugout, the person wasn't there. We didn't talk about calling anyone. We didn't go back. That was it. For them. For me, it stuck. The way it waited for quiet, the way it didn't chase, the way it positioned itself just to be seen. A couple weeks later, I went back alone in daylight. Not because I was brave, because I was annoyed. I needed to prove it was nothing. The field looked smaller in the sun. I walked straight to the dugout. That's where I found the cigarette butts. Fresh, filters bright, tucked back in the corner like someone had been sitting there. None of us smoked, not one. I stood there staring at them, and the field felt different, like a place someone used because they knew no one would bother them. I left without exploring further. I didn't go near the tree line. Now, when I drive past, I don't look at the field anymore. I look at the woods. We thought we were wasting time. Somebody else was spending it. He only showed up when the sun started going down. That was the rule. I didn't notice it right away, but once I did, I couldn't unsee it. Sunset came, light softened, and there he was, standing on the ridge across the valley like he'd been scheduled. The first time, I didn't panic. I barely reacted at all. I saw a silhouette, registered another hiker, and went back to what I was doing. People hike the Appalachian Trail every day. People stop to watch sunsets. Nothing about that is unusual. What made it unusual was how still he was. I was in Virginia, 2019, doing a short section hike with my friend Jordan. 2 nights, nothing ambitious. We were trying to unplug, not conquer anything. We'd watched enough trail videos to feel prepared, which in hindsight was part of the problem. Our first day was textbook. Warm afternoon, shaded climbs, that good rhythm where your body complains, but your brain stays calm. By late afternoon, we found a decent camp spot. Not official, just a flat area that clearly had hosted tents before. Fire ring, a couple of trees good for hanging a food bag, and a wide opening through the trees that looked out over a valley. Across the valley was a ridgeline, far enough away to feel like scenery, not part of our space. It was pretty, easy to ignore. We set up camp on autopilot, filtered water, pitched the tent, argued briefly about how high the bear bag needed to be. Dinner was dehydrated meals and bad jokes. Everything felt normal. As the sky started changing color, Jordan said, "Yo." I followed his finger. On the ridge across the valley, there was a person. Just a dark silhouette against the fading light. Upright, human-shaped, and not moving. I squinted. "Is that a guy?" "Has to be," Jordan said, shrugging like he didn't want to give it importance. I waved without thinking. It was automatic. See a person. Acknowledge them. The figure didn't wave back. Jordan called out, "Hey!" There was no chance it would carry that far, but it felt the right thing to do, like confirming we were all just people doing normal things. The figure didn't react at all, and not in a maybe he didn't notice way. Nothing about it changed, no shift, no head turn, just stillness. We watched for a minute, then another. The figure stayed exactly where it was. When the light dropped enough that the ridgeline blended into shadow, the silhouette didn't walk away. It just disappeared into darkness. That night, I slept fine. I thought about it, sure, but it didn't feel threatening yet. It was just a strange detail. Trail weirdness. The next morning was normal. Birds, leaves, wind. No signs anyone had been near our camp. Bear bag still tied, gear untouched. If it had ended there, this would have been a forgettable story. But the second night, he came back. Different camp spot. Same valley, same ridgeline. We were setting up dinner when the sky started dimming, and I felt my attention drift to the ridge before I consciously chose to look. There he was. Same spot, same stillness. Jordan said, "No way." I pulled out my phone to get a picture. Not because I expected a good one. Phones don't handle distance or dusk, but because I wanted proof. Something that made it feel less subjective. The photo was useless. A smudge on a line. Zooming in made it worse. Jordan tried too. Same result. We kept looking with our eyes because that was the only way it looked real. I waved again, more stubborn than friendly, like I was trying to force the situation into normalcy. But nothing. Jordan shined his headlamp across the valley. The beam died long before it reached the ridge. He said, "Maybe it's a stump." I said, "A stump that only shows up at sunset?" Neither of us laughed. After dark, we noticed little things that didn't quite fit. A rock near the fire ring wasn't where Jordan remembered it. The bear bag rope looked slightly looser, like the knot had been handled. Near the edge of camp, there was a crumpled wrapper that wasn't ours. Each thing had a reasonable explanation. Wind, previous campers, faulty memory. Still, we checked our pockets more than once for our keys. We kept scanning the trees behind us, and I kept thinking about how quiet the ridge had gone. The third evening was the one that broke it. We planned to leave the next morning, so the day was easy. Short hike, minimal effort. We found another spot with the same valley view, and by then it felt like we were testing something. I told myself, if he shows up again, I'm done pretending this is coincidence. The sun wasn't even down when he appeared. There was still color in the trees, still detail in the bark. And there he was, already in position, like he'd arrived early. Jordan said, "He's here already." I stared, trying to force detail out of the shape. Hat, backpack, jacket, anything. Nothing. Just a person-shaped absence. Then I heard a footstep behind us. One step on leaves, close enough that it sounded placed. Jordan turned at the same time I did. There was nothing there, just trees and dark brush. I looked back across the valley. The figure was still on the ridge. That's when it stopped being unsettling and turned into a logic problem. If that silhouette was real and still across the valley, then the sound behind us meant someone else was close. And if the footstep wasn't human, then it was doing a convincing impression of one. Jordan whispered, "There's more than one." We packed without talking. Fast but careful, we didn't want to announce ourselves. I kept looking at the ridge. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. We left at first light. No breakfast. No lingering. We just walked until the trees felt less tight around us. Weeks later, I was deleting photos from my phone when I found the ridge shots again. Still useless. Still blurry. Then I noticed something in a different photo. One Jordan took of me adjusting the bear bag rope. In the background on the near ridge behind us, there was a shape. Not across the valley. Closer. Just a dark vertical line between trees. Too straight to be a trunk. Too placed to be shadow. Zooming in didn't help. It just confirmed it was there. To this day, I keep telling myself it was just a guy on a ridge. It hit me that if I screamed, it would just be noise in the snow. Not in a poetic way, that if I It hit me that if I screamed, it would just be noise in the snow. Not in a poetic way, not in a movie scene way, just a simple, practical realization that landed hard and stayed there. In 2016, I was working remote IT contracts for a company with equipment scattered across a few isolated sites. They housed me in contractor lodging. Small, functional, built for people who were there to work and then leave. One bedroom, one living area, a kitchen that always smelled like fuel because the generator shed was close. You don't go outside much in places like that unless you have a reason. The cold teaches you efficiency, so does the distance. That night started like most of them. I closed my laptop after a long call, reheated something frozen, and ate standing up. Outside, the snow was falling quietly, the kind that makes everything feel padded. The porch light carved out a small circle of visibility. Past that was darkness and white. The power went out sometime after I got into bed. Out of nowhere, just off, the heater cut. The hum disappeared and the fridge clicked and went quiet. Normally, the generator would kick in after a short delay. I waited for it. It didn't happen. I sat up, annoyed more than anything. Outages weren't rare, but this one felt different because nothing followed it. I grabbed my phone for light and noticed there was no service. That wasn't unusual either, but paired with the outage, it made the house feel suddenly smaller. I walked to the living room window that faced the porch. At first, I saw nothing, just the edge of the railing, the snow collecting on the steps, my own reflection in the glass. Then something moved. Not in the porch light, just beyond it. A shape passing through that thin band where visibility ended. No flashlight, no phone glow, just a person-sized movement. I stood there trying to give it a normal explanation. A coworker, someone lost, someone checking another unit. But if you need help out there, you knock. You make yourself obvious. The shape didn't. It passed out of view and was gone. A minute later, it came back. Closer now, but still just out of view. I turned on my headlamp, then immediately turned it off when the reflection blinded me. Switched to my phone flashlight instead, angling it low so I could see without lighting myself up. The shape disappeared again, then returned. The third time, it stopped near the porch steps, far enough to stay hidden. That's when the thought hit me. If I screamed, it would just be noise in the snow. No neighbors close enough, no traffic, no sound carrying far in that kind of quiet. And with the power out, there was no background noise at all, just silence. I let out a whispered hello without even realizing it. Nothing answered. I checked my phone again. No signal. I tried calling. Nothing. I tried 911 out of instinct. It didn't connect. I pulled on boots and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I hated that I felt better holding it. I stayed away from the window, watching from the side of the room. The shape moved away from the porch, then returned again. Each time it stayed near that same boundary. Never committing, never leaving for good. It felt like waiting. Then I heard the doorknob. Just once. A clean test. Pressure. Release. I didn't move. A few seconds later, there were 2 light taps on the window frame. Enough to let me know it was intentional. I backed away, keeping the flashlight pointed low. My mind ran through options I didn't like. Turn on a light or stay dark. Speak or stay silent. Do something or do nothing. I stayed quiet. The shape moved away again, then came back, then left. Time stopped behaving normally. My legs ached from standing still. Every small sound inside the house felt huge. I sat on the hallway floor with my back against the wall, flashlight in my lap, and waited for the sky to change color. When dawn finally came, I opened the door cautiously. Cold air rushed in. The porch steps were empty, but the snow wasn't. Boot prints approached. They stopped just short of the top step, right where someone could stand and listen. Right where someone could look inside without being seen clearly. Then they turned away. Later, when I finally had service again, I asked the property manager if anyone had been around overnight, if there'd been a reason. He replied casually, probably someone checking cabins. Happens sometimes. That explanation didn't help. It made me realize how normal it is out there for people to try doors and how far away help really is when they do. If these stories made you realize how helpless things get,
Save every day on home decor at Hobby Lobby. Come shop seating, storage, clocks, mirrors, and more.
My name is Ashley, and I was 24 at the time, working as a junior designer. This happened at my first real agency job in Atlanta. It was late, but not unusually late. One of those nights where nobody officially says you have to stay, but everyone knows leaving early would be noticed. We were wrapping final comps for a client who kept asking for small tweaks that weren't small at all. The office looked sleek in the daytime. At night, it felt stripped down. I was new enough that I didn't know when it was okay to log off, so I stayed. Told myself I'd leave after one more export. That's when Trevor showed up at my desk again. He wasn't on my team, account side, but he hovered around creative a lot. Always helpful, always checking in. The kind of guy who made a point of learning your name fast and using it often. When I first started, I thought he was just friendly. He'd comment on my work, ask where I was from, joke about agency burnout. But over time, the questions got more specific. What part of town I lived in, whether I had roommates, what time I usually left. That night, he leaned on the edge of my desk and smiled. "You're still here," he said. "Trying not to redo this entire thing," I told him. He laughed. "Want me to walk you out when you're done?" I smiled because I assumed he was joking. "I'm good." "It's late," he said, like he was correcting me. "I'll be fine." He paused. "You sure?" "Yes," I said more firmly. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll just be around." I packed up a few minutes later and headed toward the elevators. There were still a handful of people waiting, headphones in, half paying attention. I hit the button and waited. Trevor appeared beside me. "Told you," he said, "I'd be around." The elevator was taking its time. He looked at the stairwell door. "We can take the stairs. It's faster." The elevator felt awkward and crowded. The stairs were quieter, more direct, and I was tired. "Sure," I said. He held the door open for me. As we started down, I noticed his footsteps weren't beside mine, they were behind. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Stairwells were narrow. People walked differently. We passed one landing, then another. The sounds changed as we moved, our steps echoing louder. "So," he said, casual, "you live alone?" I stopped short for half a second. "No, I have a roommate." "Good," he said. We kept going. "Where do you park again?" "Lower level," I said before I could stop myself. "Perfect." That's when I slowed down. "Why are you asking me that?" He smiled. "Just making conversation." It didn't feel like conversation. It felt like he was checking boxes. We reached the next landing. The door behind us swung shut. Heavy and final. He stepped ahead of me and rested his hand on the push bar of the door leading down, blocking the angle. "Come on," he said lightly. "You've been kind of off with me lately. I just want to make sure we're good." "We're good," I said. "Then tell me you're not mad." "I need to go," I said. He didn't move. He leaned in, still smiling. "You're making this weird." I tried to step around him. There wasn't space without brushing past him. The stairwell suddenly felt very small, like every inch mattered. I was weighing options, how hard I could push, whether anyone would hear, when the door below us flew open. Light poured in. Footsteps. A guy from another floor coming up fast, earbuds in. "Hey," he said, annoyed, like we were in the way. Trevor's entire demeanor flipped. "Oh, hey," he said cheerfully, lifting his hand off the door. "Just making sure she got down safe." I didn't wait. I slipped past him and headed down. I walked straight to my car, keys already out, scanning between rows like I'd misplaced something. I locked the doors the second I got in and sat there staring at the steering wheel. The next day, Trevor acted like nothing happened. Joked in the kitchen, slacked me a meme, asked how my morning was. I thought about reporting it, but nothing had happened. Not officially. No threat, no witnesses. Just a moment where my choices narrowed. So I adjusted instead. Different parking levels, different routes, elevators only. I stopped staying late alone. If I did, I called my roommate and kept her on the line until I was in my car. A few months later, I was badging in when I overheard security talking. That account guy asked again, one of them said. Wanted to know what time the designers usually leave. I didn't ask which one. I already knew. My name is Dave. I was managing a casual restaurant in Reno, and this happened during a closing shift. It was a midweek night. The restaurant feels bigger once the last table walks out. Lights still on, music still playing, booths wiped down, chairs flipped, the smell of fryer oil still in the air. We weren't fancy. Burgers, ribs, local crowd. Families early, drinks late. Most of my adult life had been spent managing places like that, so closing happened without me even thinking about it. Print the reports, count the drawers, do the safe drop, walk the kitchen, check the back doors. Same routine every night. That night, it was me, a dishwasher named Manny, and a guy named Derek. Derek had been there longer than most. Not management, but he liked acting like it. Always watching, always talking about theft, always positioning himself as the only one who really cared. Earlier that week, we'd had an issue with someone sneaking leftover beer out after close. Owner got upset, gave a speech about shrink, threatened to cut hours. Since then, Derek had been acting like we were guarding a vault. So, when he said casually, "I'm locking the fire exit," I didn't react right away. I was in the office counting drawers, pen in hand. "What?" I said. He was standing in the doorway, keys already out, smiling. "The fire exit," he said. "We've been getting hit." I looked up. That door stays accessible. He laughed, like I was being dramatic. "Relax. Nobody uses it. It's a fire exit," I said. "Don't lock it." He lifted his hands in surrender. "Okay, boss. Just trying to help." Then he walked away. I should have followed him. Should have checked the door myself. That's what I usually do. But Manny was on a trash run. I still had the safe drop, and I was tired in that end-of-shift way where everything feels heavier. I finished the count, grabbed the deposit bag, and headed down the back hall toward the freezer. The back of a restaurant at night has its own noise. Refrigeration units humming, metal popping as it cools, the ice machine cycling. Normal sounds, but they feel louder when you're one of the last people inside. I did a quick inventory, checked the walk-in, made a note about missing chicken tenders, and headed for the back exit. I pushed the bar. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. For a second, my brain told me I was doing it wrong, pulling instead of pushing, being stupid. I checked the handle. Locked. In that moment, irritation turned into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I walked fast to the front. Dining room lights were dimmed now. Manny was still outside. Derek was by the host stand, wiping a counter that didn't need it. "Why is the back exit locked?" I asked. He didn't pretend. "Because we've been getting hit." "We're still inside," I said. "It's just for a minute," he said. "Relax." I moved past him and tried the front doors. Locked. Side door. Locked. I stopped and looked at him. "Unlock them," I said. He didn't move. "Why are you so tense?" "I'm not tense," I said. "Unlock the doors." He sighed, like I was exhausting him. "You don't trust anybody." That's when I noticed the chair. It had been nudged against the front entrance, not enough to block it, just enough to slow it. The kind of thing you do if you want control without making it obvious. "Move the chair," I said. He smiled. "You really don't trust me." "What are you doing?" I asked. "Proving a point. he said. You always act like I'm the problem. I walked back to the rear hall and pushed the fire exit again, then went back up front. Derek unlocked the doors. He looked at me. Or what? My mind jumped straight to logistics. What if Manny tried to come back in? What if a fryer flared? What if someone got hurt? What if there was any emergency at all? Every exit was controlled by one guy with a key he shouldn't have been using. I pulled out my phone. Derek's tone shifted immediately. Don't do that. Unlock the doors, I said. He stepped closer. You're really gonna call the cops over a door? He asked. I'm calling someone, I said, because you locked fire exits with people inside. For a second, it felt like he was deciding how far he could push. Then there was a knock on the front door. Hard. Impatient. A delivery guy from a nearby bakery stood outside with a crate, trying to see in. Derek flinched, just a little. He moved fast then, slid the chair away, unlocked the door, flipped into friendly mode. Sorry about that, he said to the guy. Just closing up. While he signed the slip, I went straight back and tested the fire exit again. After the delivery guy left, Derek acted like the moment had passed. What? He said when I stared at him. Happy now? I didn't argue. I told Manny to clock out and stayed between Derek and the doors until he finally left, talking the whole time like we were friends, and this had all been nothing. The next day I told the owner, and the owner did what owners do when they don't want paperwork. He was probably just being overprotective, he said. No one got hurt. No one got hurt, like that was the only thing that mattered. Derek stayed. The owner talked to him. Nothing changed. He kept offering to walk people out, kept watching, kept smiling. I quit a few weeks later, not because the job was hard. I'd managed restaurants my whole life. I quit because Derek proved something that night, and I couldn't unknow it. He could control the exits with one cheap key, and he did it calmly, like he'd been waiting for the right moment to try. I was 22, interning on a corporate campus in Reston. Late shift, everyone else was gone. It was one of those glass and steel office parks that looks impressive during the day and feels wrong at night. Bright lobby, big logo on the wall, security desk that mostly exists for show. After business hours, the place turns quiet in a way that makes every sound hard to ignore. I stayed late a lot during that internship. I wanted to be the intern who got invited back. I had this idea that if I worked harder than everyone else, someone would notice. That night, I was finishing a deck that had already been revised 3 times. Fonts, spacing, numbers, the kind of work where you stop trusting your own eyes. I'd ordered delivery that tasted like cardboard and was running on caffeine and stubbornness. Around 7:30, I heard footsteps. Not cleaning crew footsteps. No cart, no keys. Just someone walking. I looked up and saw Martin. Not his real name, but close enough. He wasn't my manager. He wasn't even on my team. He was one of those mid-level employees who seemed to float everywhere. I didn't know anyone. I was new. He'd tell me which directors were difficult, who to avoid, who liked interns who took initiative. But after a while, it started to feel like he always knew where I was. If I moved to a conference room, he'd pass by. If I took a call in the hallway, he'd appear at the corner like he was heading somewhere else. He always had a reason. I always told myself I was imagining it. That's the thing with offices. You don't want to be dramatic, especially as an intern. Martin leaned against my cubicle wall. Still here, he said. You're dedicated. I smiled. Or bad at time management. You're not bad, he said quickly. Need help? I'm good, I said. Almost done. He nodded, but didn't leave. He asked what I was working on. I gave him the short version. He complained about the director. I laughed in the right places and kept my hands on the keyboard so it looked like I was busy. Then he said, "Can you come to the break room for a second?" The break room was down a long hallway, past dark conference rooms with glass walls. During the day, it was crowded. At night, it felt staged. What for? I asked. 2 minutes, he said. I don't want people hearing. That didn't make sense. There was no one around. But he said it like he was doing me a favor. I should have said no. Instead, I saved my work, grabbed my phone, and followed him. The motion lights clicked on ahead of us and shut off behind us. Every glass surface reflected us like we were the only two people left in the building. Inside the break room, the overhead light was on, but it still felt dim. It smelled like old coffee and microwaved food. Martin stepped in first. I stayed close to the doorway without meaning to. He looked toward the hallway, then bent down and slid something under the door. Small. Dark. A rubber doorstop. He did it smoothly, like it was normal. "Sorry," he said. "This door slams." I looked at the wedge, then at him. "Okay." He leaned against the counter, calm, comfortable. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, "about your future." I nodded, even though my shoulders were all tense. "You're smart," he continued. "People notice, but internships don't mean much unless you play them right." That should have felt flattering. It didn't. Then he shifted. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he asked. It wasn't playful, just direct. "No," I said. He watched my face. "You're always nice to me. Why? Because you're older than me. Because I want a job. Because I don't know how to say no without consequences. I'm nice to everyone," I said, forcing a small laugh. He didn't laugh. He stepped closer. "You don't have to do that," he said. "You can be honest." That's when I decided I was done. I reached for the door handle, casual, like I was just heading back to my desk. I turned it. Nothing. I pushed again. Harder. Still nothing. I laughed, automatically. It stuck. Martin didn't move. He just watched me. I tried again. Slower. Felt the resistance. The wedge. "Did you lock the door?" I asked. "So we could talk," he said. "We talked," I said. "Move it." "Why are you uncomfortable?" he asked, like he was genuinely curious. I didn't answer. I pulled out my phone and opened my team group chat. "Hey, anyone still on this floor? I think I left my charger somewhere." The typing bubble appeared and the relief was immediate. "Who are you texting?" Martin asked. "No one," I said, then corrected myself. "Just checking." He lifted his hand slightly. "Okay, I'm just talking." I tried the door again. Nothing. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Cleaning staff. The sound changed everything. Martin sighed like I was inconveniencing him, reached down and kicked the wedge away. The door opened easily. "See?" he said, bright again. "No big deal." I walked out without saying anything. Went straight back to my desk and stared at my screen until my body caught up with what just happened. I packed up as soon as the cleaners moved on and left without looking for him. The next day, he acted normal, joked, asked if I was good. I said yes and avoided being alone after that. Changed my schedule, left with other people, not because anything happened, but because something almost had. A couple weeks later, I walked past his desk while he was gone. One drawer was open. Inside was the same rubber doorstop, right next to a pack of pens. Not an accident, not a coincidence, a tool. I closed the drawer and walked away. This one sounds small until you realize what it implies. Back in 2021, I worked at a mid-sized corporate campus. Badge access, front desk, security office near the loading bay, the kind of place that likes to feel secure. I wasn't anyone important, but IT is one of those roles where people know your name because you're the person they call when they're locked out or something breaks 5 minutes before a meeting. That week was normal. Tickets, printer issues, password resets. Thursday night, I went to bed early because I'd been feeling run down, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't really fix. Friday morning, I woke up knowing I wasn't going in. Scratchy throat, unsettled stomach, that foggy heaviness that makes even standing feel like a negotiation. I texted my manager, "Not coming in today, not feeling great." He replied, "Got it, feel better." That was it. No Slack message, no team email. I didn't say I was sick, just absent. I put my phone on silent, and spent the morning half asleep on the couch, TV on low, not really watching. At 10:12 a.m., my phone lit up. It was a text from Aaron. Aaron wasn't my boss. He worked in operations. I dealt with him often because he always had urgent IT problems that never actually were. The text said, "Feeling better yet?" On its own, it wasn't alarming, but it was early, and I hadn't told anyone I was sick. People miss work for all kinds of reasons. I replied, "Hey, just taking the day. Not feeling great." I expected that to be the end of it. Instead, he responded almost immediately, "Did you finally get that cough checked?" That made me sit up, because I hadn't told him about a cough. I'd had one, a dry, lingering thing, but I wasn't talking about it at work. I'd mentioned it once casually to a teammate during a meeting weeks earlier. Aaron wasn't there. I remembered that clearly. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I coughed near him once. Maybe he guessed. Still, it bothered me. Finally get that cough checked sounded like something he'd been tracking. I replied, "What cough? I'm just not feeling well." A minute passed. Then another text came through. "Hope it's not your stomach again." That one hit harder. I had gone home early once months before with food poisoning. I told my manager. That was it. I hadn't made it a story. I hadn't told Aaron. There was no reason for him to know that. Now my brain started doing inventory. Had my manager said something casually? Did HR include details somewhere? Had I mentioned it in a group chat and forgotten? I checked everything. Slack, texts, emails, calendar notes, nothing. I walked into the kitchen like changing rooms might change the facts. Took water from the fridge, stood there holding the glass, replaying conversations in my head. I texted back, "How would you even know that?" He replied, "Lol, just guessing. I worry about you, man." The lull didn't help. Then another message came in. "I can swing by if you need anything." That's when my attention narrowed. We weren't friends. We didn't hang out. We barely talked unless something was broken. There was no reason he'd swing by. I hadn't responded yet when I heard something outside. A car door. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't want to be obvious. I walked to the side of the living room where the blinds didn't quite close and looked through the gap. There was a car parked down the street. Not parked in front of a house, not in a driveway. Just sitting there. I couldn't see the driver clearly, windshield glare and distance. But the car wasn't moving. After maybe 30 seconds, it rolled forward slowly, then stopped again. Normal drivers don't do that. They park, they leave, or they keep going. This felt like adjustment. I stepped back and checked the locks. Front door, deadbolt, back door, garage, all secure. I went back to my phone. The question that kept repeating wasn't, "Is that him?" It was, "How would he know where I live?" I didn't text him again. I didn't want confirmation, and I also didn't want to be wrong. So I called my manager. He answered quickly. I asked if he'd told anyone why I was out. "No," he said. "I just said you weren't in." "Did HR send anything?" "No. Why?" I told him about the texts. His confusion turned into irritation fast. "That's not normal," he said. "Don't respond. If he shows up, call the police." Hearing someone else say it out loud helped. I hung up and checked the blinds again. The car was still there. A minute later, it rolled forward, turned the corner, and disappeared. Later that afternoon, I asked my manager to quietly look into something. How someone could access my address. He called me back sounding uncomfortable. Apparently, earlier that month, Aaron had asked the front desk for my home address. He said it was for an emergency contact update. And the front desk, who should have stopped it, gave it to him because he sounded official and confident. There was no record, nothing I could point to and say, "This is the moment it crossed a line." Nothing technically happened. He didn't knock. He didn't leave anything. He didn't commit a crime anyone wanted to deal with. But that's what stayed with me. It wasn't that he knew I was sick. It was that he knew how to find me without asking and tried it like it was normal. I'm 29, Inventory in a distribution center in Ontario. Night counts. Big building, bad lighting even when it's on. This was in 2021 when I was working swing into nights. The shift that starts busy and ends quiet in a way that never feels natural. During the day, the warehouse is loud and crowded. At night, it feels like the building is pretending to be empty while you're still inside it. I was doing cycle counts in the back half, where the aisles get tighter and the pallets go all the way up to the steel. Shrink wrap everywhere. Forklifts parked with their forks low, like they'd been put to sleep. You can stand between racks back there and not be visible from either end unless someone walks right up on you. I had my scanner, a clipboard, and one earbud in with a podcast playing low. Not for entertainment, just to stop my brain from filling the silence with noise that wasn't there. Half the job at night is counting. The other half is not getting trapped somewhere dumb. The lighting was already being annoying. Some sections were motion censored, others controlled remotely by facilities. You learn to wave an arm now and then to keep the lights from dimming. It's normal. Everyone jokes about it. I was halfway through counting a bin of small hardware, bolts and brackets that never matched the label, when the lights shut off. The hum stopped. The scanner screen lit my hands, and that was it. Normally, the emergency strips kick on right away. Thin lights along the floor, exit signs glowing red and green. Ugly, but comforting. There was a gap, a few seconds where nothing came on. Long enough to feel how big the dark actually was. I stood still, waiting for the emergency lights, telling myself it was another power-saving glitch. I even smiled, already picturing the next meeting where someone would say, "We're improving the lighting situation." Then I heard a voice. Close. Oh, I thought everyone left. It was a woman's voice, familiar enough that my brain tried to pin it to someone I worked with. But the way it sounded was wrong. In a warehouse, voices echo. This didn't. It sat right in the aisle with me, like it wasn't meant to carry. My first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. Who's messing around back here? I said, yeah, I'm still here. The second I spoke, I wished I hadn't. My voice sounded too loud, like I just dropped a tool on concrete. I'd given away exactly where I was. I waited for a response. But there was nothing. No footsteps leaving, no apology, just quiet. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight. The beam bounced off shrink wrap and reflective tape, turning everything white and then gone again. No person. But the voice hadn't come from the main lane behind me. It had come from inside the aisle. Then I heard footsteps. Quiet. The kind you make when you don't want to announce yourself. They were coming toward me. I backed up slowly, keeping the phone light up, sweeping it side to side. I didn't turn and run. Too many things to trip over. My shoulder brushed a pallet, cardboard digging into my arm. Everything smelled like detergent from the cleaning supplies stored nearby. I called out again. Who is that? Still nothing. The steps kept coming, staying inside the aisle. That mattered. Someone in the main lane would sound different. This felt intentional, like they were using the racks to stay close. I moved the flashlight down. The beam hit a pallet jack. The footsteps stopped the moment my light hit it. Right then, the emergency lights flickered on. Weak strips along the floor, exit signs glowing. Enough to see shapes, not enough to feel settled. The aisle was empty. No one between the racks, no one at either end. Just the pallet jack sitting there like it belonged. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for someone to step out and laugh and say it was a joke. I walked out into the main lane fast, not running, but not casual either, and stopped near a camera pole with a blinking light. I radioed the floor lead and told him the lights went out in my section and there was equipment in my aisle that hadn't been there before. I added quieter that I'd heard someone. He told me to stay put. He came back with another lead. I explained it without drama, showed them the aisle, the pallet jack, repeated the exact sentence the voice said because it felt important. Probably maintenance, one of them said. They mess with the lights. I asked if maintenance was on site. He shrugged. We checked the sign-out sheet. Just a clipboard with times and initials. One name stood out. Carla, from a nearby zone. Clocked out 10 minutes before the lights went off. Carla's voice could have been the one I heard. Close enough that my brain wanted it to be her. When she came in the next day, I asked her straight up if she'd been back there around 1. She looked confused. No, I clocked out and went straight to my car. I told her what happened. Her eyes darted away for half a second before she said, "That wasn't me." I asked my supervisor about the lights shutting off all at once. He said it was a power-saving cycle. When I mentioned the delay before the emergency strips, he said, "Sometimes there's a lag." I asked who could control the lights. Facilities, maybe security. I asked about cameras in those aisles. Mostly main lanes, he said, which meant the tight places weren't covered. A week later, I was back in that section for another count. Same aisle, same shelves, same smell. The pallet jack was gone, but the lights blinked just once like a test, then stayed on. I didn't tell myself it was definitely a person. I didn't have proof, no footage, no name that fit cleanly. What I had was this. The voice came from inside my aisle, the lights went out in a way they normally didn't, and something was placed in my path like a marker. And I had that sign-out sheet. Carla clocked out, but the voice sounded close enough to make my brain hesitate. Like the building offered me a familiar explanation, so I wouldn't push further. If these stories made you rethink who you trust at work, you're not overreacting. Smash that like button, subscribe for more nightmares, and let me know which story made you the most uncomfortable. Now, if you want something even worse, imagine being paid to sit alone all night and watch empty buildings. Click now to watch 4 scary security guard horror stories. Because some jobs don't just observe danger, they attract.
What you want to do is see.
This happened on New Year's. I was home alone for the holiday, having already spent Christmas with family, and didn't have anyone to go out with on New Year's night. So I just kicked it back at home, had a couple beers, and watched TV the whole night. I watched the whole Times Square celebration, then just turned on some older holiday movies. I wasn't all that tired, and around 2 a.m. I felt like getting up and doing something, since I'd been sitting on the couch pretty much all day. I checked out the windows. It was snowing a bit, but not too much, and I knew it was cold and dark out there, but a walk just sounded really nice. I grabbed my jacket and hat and gloves, and headed out to walk around the neighborhood. Right away, I noticed it was surprisingly quiet outside. Even though it was 2 a.m., I figured because of New Year's, there would be parties and whatever. Yet, all the houses only had their outdoor Christmas lights on, and no cars were driving through the streets. It was just calm and empty. Very peaceful, actually. I'm not even too sure how long I was out there for. Obviously, I wasn't fully sober, so time was hard to keep track of. And I was zigzagging through the neighborhood with no real direction or route in mind. Eventually, I made it to the park. It looked like the path hadn't been shoveled since that morning, but it only looked like maybe 2 inches of snow, so I just started walking down it anyway. Thought the slight change in scenery would keep the walk interesting. I walked a little ways in before realizing that not only was the snow actually getting harder to walk through, but there also weren't any lights on along the path. I'd walked it at night before, and it always had these small, sort of street lamps lining the trail, but I guess they turned them off for the winter. So after a few minutes, I turned back around. I dragged my feet through the snow, walking maybe a minute back the way I came, when I saw something pretty weird. There was another set of tracks, going right along mine from just a few minutes ago. Someone had to have been walking right behind me, and honestly, it kind of looked like they had been following me. given that there were no shoe prints there before. But I didn't see anyone, and when I tried to see if they had turned around or where they went, I found the tracks led off the trail, going out into the dark areas that I couldn't see anything in. For all I knew, there could have been someone standing just 10 feet in front of me, and I wouldn't have a clue, because it was pitch black. I quickened my pace to get out of there, but I still didn't fully think it was something to worry too much about. I admit it could have been me being tipsy and not realizing the strangeness and possible danger I was in, especially with the tracks going off the trail and leading straight into the darkness. At the time, I tried to assume it was just some really big coincidence. I got away from there and walked further into my neighborhood, not going directly home yet. I walked for 15 more minutes. Not that I was looking very hard, but I didn't see anyone else, so I thought by then I was all good. When I made it back home, I took all my winter stuff off and figured I'd take a shower and then hopefully be tired enough to get in bed. It wasn't until I was already halfway up the stairs that I realized how dark it was, and that the upstairs lights were off. This caught me off guard, because I'm the kind of person that leaves all the lights on all day. I hadn't even been upstairs since waking up in the morning, so I definitely left the lights on up there. I could see how this might sound like some small thing that I fixated on, but I think even if I were fully drunk, I'd still have known that those lights were left on. I cautiously walked the last few steps up to the hall and looked down, then flicked the light back on. I didn't really know what I was looking for though. I walked through and just peeked my head into each of the rooms, seeing if there was anything obvious. I made sure to close each of the doors after looking, which is why after checking the last room and turning back around, I felt my heart stop. The first door right by the stairs was wide open. To me, that 100% confirmed that someone was inside my house right now. After freezing up for a few seconds, I called out asking who was there. I was scared to move. They could have been right there in that room, or had snuck downstairs and really been anywhere at this point. I remember taking slow, careful, and quiet steps down the hall, feeling adrenaline and a sinking, awful feeling in my gut as I approached the doorway. And then I woke up. And no, this wasn't all a dream. I woke up laying on the floor in the middle of the hallway, head spinning and with a horrible migraine. I think only 10-ish minutes had passed between then and now, and it was apparent that I'd been attacked and knocked unconscious, with no recollection of anything but the moments leading up to whatever the hell happened. Even my vision was blurry and fading in and out. I called 911 right away. Whoever it was that broke in and attacked me was long gone, but I tried to give the police an account of everything I could remember. It still bothers me so much that a part of my memory was just blacked out like that. I likely came face to face with the guy, probably enough to get a good description of him. Hell, I might have even known exactly who it was. Yet, it's like my own head is hiding it from me. After that night, the updates were minimal, and nothing ever led to anything significant. I don't know who it was or what his intentions really were, but I wouldn't doubt it if he didn't even want me to wake up. I work at a local ski resort in a small mountain town as maintenance/security. All my job really was just cleaning and general maintenance stuff, but I was somewhat trained for security as well, because we'd had a few break-ins overnight to steal skiing and snowboarding gear, or to try using the slopes while we were closed. After the several instances, the company changed schedules around to have 2 people working overnight to do our regular work while also deterring any possible trespassers. We didn't have cameras or anything, so the security title of my position never really affected my day-to-day job, because after we started working overnights, we didn't have any more people try breaking in for months. The most we had was someone coming up to the door and trying to look inside, but aside from that, it was always quiet. Also, like I mentioned, I never worked alone on these overnight shifts, or at least technically not alone. My coworker Matthew was always scheduled for the same shift, but he worked on the opposite side of the resort. The resort was split into 2 large sections, with just a hallway connecting them. Sometimes I wouldn't even see Matthew for days or weeks at a time. So even though I wasn't, it really felt like I was working alone most nights. But this night had started out the same as usual. I clocked in and started cleaning up the main floor. The place gets really messy during the busy season, so even though it wasn't the hardest work, there definitely was a lot to do. The first hour went by pretty quick. I was still in the large main room when I heard what sounded like a tapping noise. Maybe someone tapping on a window. I set my things down and walked to the front where most of the windows were. I didn't see anything until I walked right up to one of the windows and noticed footprints right under it in the snow. They went right up to the glass, then went around to the other side of the building. Not too sure what to think about it, I threw my coat on and stepped outside to look around. I thought it might have been someone lost, and if it wasn't, then I had to tell them to leave. But as soon as I got out there, I saw the footprints go from the window to the parking lot, which was already plowed, so from there I had no idea where they went. It was pretty weird, but it was way too cold and dark to be walking around the whole perimeter. I went back inside. I got right back to work, hoping whoever that was wouldn't come up again. I want to say 30 minutes passed. By then, surely the snow had covered up any of the tracks outside, so even thinking about it wasn't worth my time anymore. That was until I heard a few doors open by the connecting hallway of the resort, and a few moments later, Matthew showed up. He looked distressed and kind of confused when he saw me. He immediately asked what I was doing. I looked around confused and just said I was working. Matthew nodded his head, acknowledging it, but almost as if that answer didn't make sense to him. "Is everything okay?" He said yeah, that he must have been tired or something, shaking his head. Before he left, I mentioned that I saw some footprints in the snow outside, and asked if it was him. He shook his head no. I hoped that he would explain more about what he was so concerned about, now that I told him about the strange thing that I saw, assuming from the way he was acting that he had something strange happen too. But he didn't say anything else. He just left my section of the resort and went back to the other side. Now, me and Matthew weren't good friends or anything, just to be clear. Again, we rarely ever saw each other, so we weren't more than just acquaintances. He was also a lot older than me too, so when we did talk, it was always just work-related. I'm mentioning this to give context on why I didn't question him a little bit more, or go over to his side and really try to figure out what was going on. I kept working, but spent most of the next hour thinking about how strange of a night this was. And just when I thought the rest of the night would go by without any more occurrences, I heard a loud bang from the corridor between the resorts. Sounded like maybe a door slamming, or something heavy hitting a wall. It was enough to make me jump, and go looking to make sure Matthew was okay. I headed to the connecting corridor and didn't see anything, so I continued into the other section where Matthew was. Except he wasn't there. "Matthew? You good?" I called his name over and over, and got not even a sound in response. I started getting nervous, and as I made it to the back of that section, My stomach dropped when I saw the back door was wide open. Snow was blowing in, but it looked like the door had only been open for maybe a couple of minutes. I hurried over and looked outside. I didn't see anyone, but there were more footprints leading away from the building and heading up the resort toward where the ski lifts were. There was no reason Matthew should have been going out there, so this only made me even more nervous. I called out Matthew's name again, but the wind didn't carry my voice very far. I started getting worried, like really worried. I double-checked everywhere inside the building for him and didn't see anything. The only clue I had were the footprints in the snow. I ran back to my section and got my coat again, then hurried to the open door. I walked out and started to follow the footprints. They went way farther than I expected. It was also dead quiet outside, just wind and snow. No other signs of anyone being out there. The footprints led me all the way out to the bottom part of the ski lifts and slightly up the shallow hill, and that's when I stopped. They led out of the resort area and into the trees that lined the hill. There were no lights or anything out there, and from my knowledge, it was just a regular mountain forest past that tree line. My heart started racing a little bit more, and I got the feeling these might have not been Matthew's footprints I was following. Matthew, are you out there? There were several long seconds of silence before, in the far back behind all the trees, I saw a figure move into view and look right at me. From what little I could see, it didn't look at all like Matthew. I ran as fast as I could back down the hill and into the resort, falling multiple times from my boots getting stuck in the heavy snow. Whoever was out there didn't follow, but I knew they were watching me. I closed the door and ran to the other side where the front desk was, using that phone to call the police. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I wasn't taking any more chances looking on my own. Of course, being up in the mountains, police were about a half hour away. I hid in the closet with all the rental gear for that whole time, listening to the winds outside and the eerie calmness inside the empty resort. It was 10-ish minutes into waiting that I heard what might have been a door opening on the other end of the resort, but I didn't dare even try to see for sure. I didn't hear anything after that until police made it. Disturbingly, they found another set of footprints going back up to the back door, so whoever that was out there had come back, maybe looking for me. And it only took about 30 minutes for the police to officially state Matthew as missing. Although from the police officers I talked to, they didn't see any signs of foul play inside the resort, which makes the officers think it was someone he knew that got Matthew to let him in, or led Matthew out. Either way, once the footprints made it to the woods, there was no way to track them any further. For a while, I'm pretty sure I was actually a suspect, being one of, if not the last person to see him, but eventually they were able to confirm I didn't have anything to do with it. The whole situation was really scary, and it's hard not to blame myself a little bit for how things went down. Feel like I should have done more somehow, but I also know that if I walked deeper into the forest to follow the footprints, or had tried to help any more, there's a chance I would be missing right now too. It was about 4 years ago during the holidays. I had driven out all the way to a small town in Montana where my parents lived to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed there for a whole week before heading back home. The drive was about 16 hours, which I never thought was too bad. I really didn't mind pulling over at rest stops and taking a nap for a few hours if I had to. And I always thought it was more worth it rather than stopping at a hotel or motel, mostly because it would make the trip take even longer. Anyway, I left in the afternoon, a few hours earlier than I planned to, because there was supposedly a big winter storm headed our way, so I hoped if I left early, I could get by before it started. Think it was somewhere around 4 or 5 hours in that the storm hit. The road went from pretty much empty and uneventful to suddenly snow everywhere within minutes. The wind was really bad as well, pushing my car around and throwing snow at my windshield. I didn't feel like I was losing control or anything though, and with no other cars on the road, I still felt safe driving. However, after an hour of this, it really started tiring me out, mostly from just having to pay so much attention to the road, and the snow started piling up on the road a bit more. My phone suddenly started beeping with a winter storm advisory, and only a couple minutes after that, I lost all service. It was definitely a lot worse than I was comfortable with now, especially because if something were to happen, I'd be stuck without any way to call for help. So I pulled off at the nearest rest stop a few miles down the road. It was an empty, quiet rest stop just in the trees off the highway, with a small, snow-covered parking lot and a service building. There was only a single other car parked on the other end of the lot. It looked like it had been there from before the storm though, because the roof had a thick layer of snow over top it. Few minutes after pulling in, the storm somehow got even worse. It was a whiteout. I couldn't even see the other car anymore, and the wind was actually pretty scary. I can't imagine anyone could have been driving in weather like this. A long, boring hour went by as I sat and waited in the snowstorm. Eventually, both out of boredom and uncomfort, I decided to get out and head inside the rest stop service building to use the bathroom. As soon as I stepped out, the freezing wind and icy snow was almost immediately painful. I hurried up to the building and got in. There was just a small lobby with a few benches, some pamphlets of road maps, and 2 doors leading to the restrooms. Thankfully, the heat seemed to be working in there, so I actually just stayed in the lobby for a minute and warmed up, while looking out the windows at the snow coming down. I could only faintly see the car still parked over there, now with the snow covering the entire windshield. Thought it was strange that it didn't look like it was on. I mean, it was below 0 degrees outside, so not having the heat on would have had them freezing by now. But after a minute, I headed up to the bathroom door and pushed it open. Or tried to. It opened just a crack before slamming back shut. I pushed it again, and that time it barely budged. I took a step back. It wasn't like the door was locked. It was like someone was on the other side, preventing me from opening it. I stared at the door for a second, really just shocked and unsure what to think about that. It was really strange. I thought about just going into the women's restroom instead, assuming if whoever that was in the men's restroom was the only other car at the rest stop, then it shouldn't matter. But honestly, I didn't feel safe being in there any longer. Felt like something wasn't right about this, or that there had to be a reason they were blocking the door like that, and I really did not want to push my luck. So I hurried back out of the building. As I left, I heard the bathroom door swing open, but I didn't turn back to look. I just continued walking through the storm and back into my car. By this point into the storm, the whole rest stop parking lot was covered in snow, and I really wasn't sure if I could even leave. I wanted to, even if to just drive a few miles down to a different place to pull off at, but I didn't want to get stuck trying to leave. So I sat there and tried to wait out the storm. I tried to think of any possible reasons for someone blocking the door like that, but honestly, I couldn't think of anything. Nothing that would explain them knowing I was walking in and already being at the door to stop me from entering. Only a few minutes later, I noticed a shape start emerging from the whiteouts, coming in between my car and the building. It was a person, and basically right when he became visible, he stopped walking and just stood right in the blizzard. He looked like he was on the phone talking to someone, and he was facing me. Couldn't tell if he was looking at me though. He paced around that same spot for a minute, still talking to someone on the phone, before he started to slowly make his way closer to my car. Like he would pace a few steps toward me, then stand in the same spot for a bit, trying to make it not obvious. But at one point, when he was much closer, I very clearly saw him looking directly into the car at me. And then, all of a sudden, he had this wide, over-exaggerated smile and started approaching my window. He walked right up to my car and tapped on the window, grinning at me through the glass. I was genuinely terrified, and as embarrassing as it is to say it, I was completely frozen in fear. Like for a moment, I just couldn't get myself to do anything. The man started knocking on the window a little harder, basically hitting it, hard enough that I was surprised it didn't shatter. And then, in the distance behind him, I saw another guy come out of the rest stop building and start running over. I snapped out of it and put my car in reverse. My heart sank when my tires started spinning out. I wasn't moving at all. The guy got closer and closer until suddenly my car jolted back and got traction. I backed out and put it in drive, and in the split second before I drove off, the one man that just got there threw a knife right at the windshield. It bounced off, but put a huge crack right in the middle. I drove out of there and prayed that I didn't lose control or get stuck the whole way down the road. I was sure they would try to follow me, but as far as I know, they didn't. I drove dangerously through the storm until it started to clear up and I had service. It had been so long, though, that the police didn't find either of the men when they got there. But what they did find was the car. It was still right there in the middle of the parking lot, untouched. Despite what I had assumed, it wasn't either of the men's car. It belonged to some other guy that when the police showed me a reference photo, I didn't recognize. And over the next few days, it came out that the man was missing. No sign of him. From what I've heard, he was also on a road trip, and his family believes he pulled off the highway to sleep for the night. But then he wasn't heard from or seen again. Honestly, I think something really terrible happened at that rest stop just before I arrived there. I think one of the men was outside keeping a lookout while on call with the other, letting him know to block the door when I walked in. Had I forced my way inside, I have a really bad feeling of what I might have found, and they probably wouldn't have let me get away either.